Basil Hayden's Kentucky Straight Rye Whiskey, aged 10 years. Today we are going to be doing a review of this whiskey on the Whiskey Noobs podcast. We do a lot of, fun things and have a lot of guests on the show and things, but I think today I'm just going to sit back, I'm going to drink a whiskey, and I'm going to do a full review of it using the Whiskey Noobs flavor list. If you're on the email list, you've already got these flavors. If you're not, you can join the email list, and I'll be sending out this flavor list again with the month of August. So I figure, let's sit back, let's do a nice 3-part review of a whiskey, and I'll still do a riddle. Actually, today for the riddle, if you've been listening, you know that I do a riddle with all my guests. So I thought, well, I should do a riddle. So today I looked up a riddle. It was a list of riddles, and I scrolled until there was one that sounded good, but I couldn't see the answer to yet, and I knew that I didn't know the answer to it, and then I stopped. So now I have it. My screen is right where it needs to be. If I scroll a little bit farther, I'll see the answer, which I don't want to do that. So I'll be doing a riddle with myself today, and I'll be doing this review, like I said, using the flavor note list that I send out with the email list. I sent it out earlier in the show, and I'll be sending it out again here because we have a few new folks that joined the email list. By the way, if you're new, thank you for joining the email list. I really think it's going to make your experience with this podcast a little bit more fun. So I will be sending it out once again with the month of August. That way, you can have these flavors and use them for your own reviews, even if you're not listening to the show. So today, like I said, I'm going to be drinking Basil Hayden's Kentucky Straight Rye Whiskey. It's aged 10 years, and if you want to see what the bottle looks like, you'll see it if you're on the email list, or you can follow me on Instagram, and you'll see a photo of it. I usually post a photo of any whiskey that I have on the show. I always post a photo of it. That way you know what it looks like. So I'm going to pour myself a glass here. Okay. So I have it poured. Little bit of background on this whiskey. This was the first rye whiskey that I had and enjoyed. Let me put it that way. It's one of the first rye whiskeys I had. I'd had a couple before, and I didn't really like them. I've said it before, rye whiskey is a little bit more challenging to enjoy. So if you're newer to whiskey, then rye whiskey might not be as tasty to you. This is an American rye whiskey, so this means that the mash bill, the things that you are fermenting to create the whiskey, is at least 51% rye. So it's going to have a very strong rye flavor. And rye whiskey has a kind of a specific taste to it. Some people like it, some people don't. And it takes a little bit of getting used to. I think it's kind of as challenging as it is to start to learn to like whiskey or like a sweet bourbon. It's that challenging to get from there to liking rye, because rye is it has a challenging palate to it usually. But this one I got for Christmas actually, for the first time, and I tried it and it was really good. And so that kind of opened the door to rye whiskey for me. So I think this is probably less challenging than other ryes that I've had, which is why I picked it. So I'm going to take a quick smell of it here. So I'm smelling this, and I'm looking at the whiskey list, the note list that I mentioned. And it smells to me like green apples a lot. It smells very appley. At first glance, it's appley, and then almost a sweetness that kind of reminds me of a caramel apple, but it's not necessarily caramel. Wow, yeah, it smells very appley. I really like that, actually. I haven't done a 3-part review of this, like even on my own yet, so this is my first time doing a 3-part review of it. We do have some notes on the back of the bottle here. I'm going to read the bottle to you guys. A worthy tribute to the high rye mash bill used for our classic bourbon, this rye whiskey is aged 10 years, creating a slightly spicy yet approachable rye that achieves an elegant and complex taste profile. That's another thing I forgot to mention, is a lot of times ryes have a lot more of the spices flavors to them on the palate. And then it looks like it has notes written on the back, so I don't want to read those until I'm done with this review. But that's what it says on the front. So yeah, once again, this is a 10-year aged rye whiskey. Basil Hayden, if you haven't heard of them, they are a pretty popular bourbon maker as well. Rye whiskey and bourbon being two different things. So if you haven't listened to the episode on American whiskey for a little bit of background, that might be helpful for this episode. So you may want to go listen to that. That was episode 7 of Whiskey Noobs, so if you're listening right now, you can go back and listen to that episode. It's another pretty quick one, less than 30 minutes for sure, so that might be a little bit helpful for you for background as to what I mean when I say rye or I say American. Without further ado, I'm going to take a sip of this and see what it tastes like. So right off the bat, as I've said about rye whiskeys, they're a little bit harsher to taste. They take some getting used to. This one is actually only 80 proof, so the minimum, but it's strong. I mean, it tastes strong. What rye whiskeys usually do. When it first hit my tongue, it tasted like sour green apples to me. Like, not sour like bad, but sour like a nice, take a bite of a Granny Smith or something and it's kind of sour. So that's a pretty pleasant taste. There's something else on the back end that I haven't nailed down yet. Let me take another sip and see here. I think it's probably cinnamon on the back end. You taste it and it's like apples, and then a little bit later it's got more of a cinnamon. Let me use this list a little bit more. There's nothing creamy about this. There's nothing mapley about this at all. I definitely think there's probably a little bit of cinnamon to it. Maybe a bit of anise, which we've talked about before. That's like black licorice. That might be what's creeping up on me here, is like an anise and cinnamon. I think that's it. I think it's anise. Before I get too far into this review, though, I'm going to read myself this riddle, and I almost accidentally scrolled and saw the answer, but I did not. Okay. All 5 sisters are busy. Anne is reading a book. Rose is cooking. Katie is playing chess. And Mary is doing the laundry. Oh, I think I know this one already. What is the 5th sister doing? So based on reading it, I think I know what the 5th sister is doing. So I'm going to take a guess, and I'm going to scroll to a different one if I'm right. So I think the 5th sister is probably playing Katie in chess, because Katie can't be playing chess by herself. She's playing chess, of course. Yeah, that's it. That was pretty easy. Okay, let's do another one. A man is asked what his daughters looked like. He answers, they are all blondes, but 2. All brunettes, but 2, and all redheads, but 2. How many daughters does he have? 3, right? 1 blonde, 1 brunette, and 1 redhead? Oh, come on, is it that easy? 3. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm getting some pretty easy riddles here. It takes me a while to pick these difficult ones for people. Let's try one more. One more, and if I get it, we're just moving on from the riddles. You always find me in the past. I can be created in the present, but the future can never taint me. What am I? Ooh, this is a good one. Maybe like pictures? I don't know. I'm not going to click this one because I don't think I know it. Okay, cool. We found a challenging one. Now, let's continue our review of Basil Hayden. I would say Basil Hayden's 10-year rye, by the way, not Basil Hayden bourbon. I would say it's a little bit drier on the mouthfeel, not very oily, which I think is, from the ryes that I've had, it's kind of characteristic, and I think that might be one of the things that scares people away. A lot of people don't like the dryness. It's kind of like dry wine, you know? It's that feeling where it's like, ooh, that took the moisture right out of my mouth, and a lot of people aren't super happy with that. But I'm going to finish up this review, and then I'm going to read a little bit of background, a little bit of the notes from their website, and then we'll go through and see if we're tasting those notes, because I'm certain I'm not grabbing as many spices as I should be, but all I can taste is this green apple. Let me try it again. I got a strong green apple, maybe a tiny bit of caramel, like I had said on the nose, how it's almost like a caramel apple. I think it's easier to taste the caramel because I'm tasting so much apple that it kind of goes together like a caramel apple. Maybe still a touch of anise, and the finish is pretty long. I can still taste it pretty well in my mouth. On the finish, I think it gets a stronger, maybe anise or clove, one of those kind of a spices. Not as cinnamony as I was expecting. And like I said, definitely a drier finish. But it's good, though. Don't get me wrong. I really like rye whiskey. Like I said, it's hard to teach yourself to like rye whiskey because it's a little bit different, but there's still a lot of flavors you can unlock. Especially, this is really good if you are getting kind of bored with your bourbons, or maybe you don't like, like Scotch and Irish, things like that, but you want to try something a little bit different. That's why I like rye. You can kind of unlock a new part of your palate that you haven't really used yet, and it's really good. I'm surprised it's not as complex as I thought it was going to be. I forgot to mention, I believe this is about $70 near me for this bottle. I can look that up here in a second, but I think it's about $70 near me. Okay, yeah, I was right. So it's $70. which I use OHLQ. It's a website for any Ohio liquor store. They can give you the prices of the whiskey. So yeah, according to OHLQ, it is $70, which is what I thought it was. So you're paying kind of a lot, and it's a very good rye whiskey, because I've had less expensive rye whiskeys, and they are just not good. Like I said, they're kind of a challenging whiskey. So if you're drinking a less expensive one, that kind of makes it even more challenging. So I don't like, this sounds kind of snobbish, I don't like inexpensive rye whiskeys. Bulleit makes a rye whiskey. I don't know how much that one costs, but it's also good. But once you get too inexpensive, it can taste pretty bad. But the Bulleit rye is also another one that I enjoy. Yeah, a lot of green apple, definitely. I'm getting mostly green apple, and like I said, maybe the spiciness comes out a little bit afterward, but it's a lot of green apple, which is very enjoyable, by the way. On the front end, it tastes like a sour green apple, kind of like you just bit right into a green apple. So it's very enjoyable. Now, I'm going to look through the flavor list one last time, see if there's anything that I'm missing. I haven't really thought about like tobacco and leather, so let me try that. Okay. Not really tobacco and leather, but what I hadn't thought of before is the woodiness of it. And there's definitely almost like an old wood. Not as like old as like your Wild Turkey 101, if you've had that. It has a very old wood taste to it. But I think this does have a little bit of like an old, like moist wood like you'd find in the woods. Like if you're hiking and there's like a dead tree and maybe it like rained, that's very specific, but that kind of a flavor on the back end. Not at all when you're tasting the sour apple, but that does give it a little bit of a roundness to it, which I enjoy. Yeah, that's probably that other flavor I couldn't nail down. Now I'm going to look at the official notes and I'm going to be totally wrong, just like totally wrong. I guarantee it. But we're going to see. I'm going to look on the back, and then I also have their website brought up. So let's do both. So on the back of the bottle, it says, crafted with care, this rye whiskey opens up with notes of approachable spice and surprising sweet vanilla. I do not taste vanilla. Complemented by oak and subtle caramel. Definitely oak. Faint tobacco lingers in the finish with hints of warm cinnamon. Bottled at 80 proof, this light yet flavorful rye whiskey is sure to please any palate. So they did not mention anything about sour apple in this, and I taste sour apple. Like I said, when I sniffed it right off the bat, it tasted like a green apple. It still does. It still smells like green apple, so that's pretty crazy. It smelled like a green apple as soon as I smelled it, and it tastes like it as well. When I tried it the first time, it was at the end of the day. It was actually, I think I got it on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, and we'd been eating obviously, and then I was at a friend's house that night, and was when we tasted it. And I think I do remember it tasting, I don't remember tasting sour apple. I think I do remember it tasting more sweet than it does right now. And I haven't eaten dinner yet. I'm coming up on dinner time basically, and I haven't eaten dinner. So maybe it's because my palate is so bare that this tastes more like sour apple to me, but it really does. I mean, I'm really not getting nearly as much. I did say caramel and cinnamon, but not nearly as much as you would think by reading the back of that. Let's see if it says the same thing on the website here. Okay. Color is golden honey. Aroma, it says sweet vanilla and oak with a touch of light fruit. Now, there they mentioned light fruit, so maybe that's that sour apple. Approachable spice and oak notes with hints of caramel. Definitely hints of caramel. Definitely oak notes. Not as much spice, though. And then the finish, it says faint tobacco and warm cinnamon heat. That I could maybe see, but I'd say it's more anise than cinnamon, honestly. More of like an anise or a clove, one of those types of spices. Nothing if not enjoyable, though. For having a dry finish, it's definitely enjoyable. I don't want to scare people away from it because of that, but it is a little bit more challenging. So if you're newer to drinking whiskey, I don't know that I would go out and spend the $70 on it. Maybe go out and get yourself Bulleit rye. Let me look up how much Bulleit rye costs right now. Yeah, so Bulleit rye is $26. So maybe go out and try yourself Bulleit rye before you try this if you're going to get into rye whiskey. Because this is definitely, any rye whiskey is definitely a little bit more challenging than bourbon, I think. I think bourbon's a very approachable, I talked about this before, that I think it's really great to get people into whiskey. If rye whiskey is the first whiskey that you try to taste, you're probably not going to get into whiskey through that. You'll probably have to try it again in order to be like, oh, this is pretty good. But this is a very good rye. Definitely light fruit. They kind of say hints of light fruit, but I'm getting a lot of light fruit. I'm going to read a little bit more about it. So let's see. One thing they do say on their website that I find kind of funny is this rye can easily be enjoyed without the burn associated with higher proof whiskeys. I disagree. I drink a lot of whiskey, and I think this has the burn. I do. Maybe it's a little bit exaggerated because I haven't eaten dinner yet, but I do think it has the burn to it for sure. Back to our riddle before I continue. You always find me in the past. I can be created in the present, but the future can never taint me. What am I? I'm thinking memories or pictures. Something like that. Let's look. History. Well, kind of close. Memories, history. The future can never taint me. It's a little bit misleading. I don't know. All right, I got myself. I couldn't get it. It's history. I think memories applies. History, memories, kind of the same thing. But that's a good one. Okay, let's do one more. These are kind of fun. A man is found hanging dead from the ceiling of a room. This is fun. Oh, wait. Nope. This is one of my riddles that I have, and I haven't used it yet, so I am not going to be doing that one. I know the answer to it. How do you drop a raw egg on the concrete floor without cracking it? The egg won't crack the concrete floor. That's just a pun. That's a dad joke. What has 13 hearts but no other organs? 13 hearts but no... deck of cards. Yes. Haha. I'm good. I'm just sitting here reading riddles to myself. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention on this episode is the TikTok. So, if you haven't found me on TikTok yet, my TikTok is Whiskey Noobs Podcast. You can find me on there. Make sure you type in the podcast. I have started a series on TikTok that I think is going to be kind of fun. I'm trying things with whiskey that you would assume would be kind of gross with whiskey, or some that you're kind of like, maybe this would be good. And I'm going to try them and let you know if they taste good with whiskey or not. So the first one I did, it is already posted, is almond milk. It was gross. Spoiler alert. I was wondering like if the creaminess of the milk would go with the whiskey and almost be like a bourbon cream. It did not. It was like you're drinking them completely separately right at the same time, and super weird. It was like almond milk and whiskey. Didn't taste like creamy whiskey. I'm probably going to try, I think, pickle juice next. So by the time this is posted, I might already have the video posted of me drinking pickle juice and whiskey. So I've been trying a few gross ones, and I also post a lot of like jokes about whiskey, just funny videos. Videos that I think are funny and maybe a lot of people think are dumb. Who knows? But I really enjoy it. So if you're not following me on TikTok, this is my plug for it because I've been having a good time on there. So I think it's a good little lighthearted thing to do because a lot of the times I'm either reviewing a whiskey or going over tips or talking about not serious things as like serious like politics, but being somewhat serious on the show. So it's a little bit more goofy of a platform for me to use and a little bit more fun. Now, let's round out this review. Now that I have the notes from Basil Hayden right in front of me, let's do this again, and I'm going to look for these flavors that they say I should be tasting and smelling. So the color is golden honey. I didn't mention the color. I usually don't mention the color because we're here to drink it, but it's definitely got a golden color to it. The aroma, sweet vanilla and oak with a touch of light fruit. I would argue strong light fruit with a touch of vanilla and oak. Not even really vanilla. I guess you could say vanilla. I think vanilla you can kind of throw in just because it tastes like sweet a lot of the time. But I don't get a lot of vanilla from this. A lot of the light fruit, though. Approachable spice and oak notes with hints of caramel on the taste. Let's try it. I'll definitely say I'm sticking to my guns on the apple taste. It tastes like apple to me. The oak, I had mentioned, it kind of tastes like an older wood. I can see that. Not super strong caramel. I know I said caramel, but I think the more I drink it and look for caramel, the more I'm like, that's just not caramel. It might be the spiciness. But I disagree with some of these flavors. I'd like to try this after a meal. Maybe I will and put it on TikTok. Try it before a meal and after a meal and let you know what it tastes like. Because, like I said, I have a super fresh palate right now. But with a fresh palate, I should probably be tasting the things they say I should be tasting. And I'm definitely not. So that's very interesting to me. It's so good, though. I mean, it really is to me, this at least this glass that I'm having, is kind of like just biting into like a juicy apple. I mean, it's really good. A juicy, sour green apple. Or maybe like a Macintosh. But it's really good. it's definitely not like harsh. The dryness is a little bit harsh. If you're not into dry palates, this probably isn't for you. It's still kind of challenging. It might be a bit challenging even for me. I mean, I've mentioned before that I'm not the most experienced guy in the entire world, so maybe that's why I'm not pulling out all these flavors I'm supposed to be. But I've mentioned before, everybody's palate's totally different, so you're never gonna... 5 people can taste the same whiskey, and you'll never have them taste the exact same things, typically. Especially not if you're not a professional whiskey reviewer, you know. Very enjoyable. One thing I'll say, too, is I think this whiskey, with a lot of your harsher, more dry whiskeys, not harsher, harsher is a bad word because it makes it seem like it's not enjoyable. It is. But like a lot of your drier, more strong whiskeys, this one definitely tastes better the more you drink it. So as I'm sitting here with it over the past 25-ish minutes, it's gotten a lot sweeter the more I drink it. It's gotten a lot smoother the more I drink it, for sure. The first drink was a little bit harsh, I'm not going to lie, even for me. But it's definitely sweetened up a little bit. I can see more of the sweetness that they're calling caramel. Maybe it's caramel. Maybe I just think it's caramel because I'm tasting apple. But the apple's gotten a little bit sweeter, and it's definitely rounding out a bit more. And I will say, I don't think the palate of this whiskey is super deep, super round, but I will say it has a very long finish. You can taste it in your mouth for a while, and I can still taste it in my mouth. So it's got a really good finish to it. Is it worth $70? I think so for a rye whiskey, but I'm not as experienced in the realm of ryes to say, oh, well, you know, there aren't the Buffalo Trace of rye that's going to be $20, $25 and taste like this. Maybe there is, but I would say it's probably worth it just because it does. I keep saying how harsh it is. I should clarify. The notes that I am getting, like the apple and the spiciness, or like woodiness, they are strong. Like, it's not like another whiskey where you just taste alcohol and then taste the flavors. It does have a strong alcohol taste to it, but it also has very strong flavor notes to it. I should add that, and I think that's one of those things I've mentioned before that comes with buying a more expensive whiskey, is that this does have that nice, strong flavors to it, especially on the nose. I mean, when you smell this, you smell flavors with a bit of alcohol to them. So definitely an enjoyable drink. Definitely drier on the finish. I mean, it's still, my mouth's still a little bit dry, and I typically do lean towards the more oily whiskeys, but I'm still enjoying it. And they even put in the, obviously they want to sell it, but they put, whiskey is sure to please any palate, this whiskey. Obviously it's an advertising thing, but I don't typically like the drier palate, and I do like this whiskey. I mean, I've drank down this bottle pretty far. For the amount of whiskeys that I have, to drink a bottle down that far and within the span of a few months even is pretty impressive. I don't do that often. So this is a pretty good whiskey, and I don't want people to be scared by the harshness, but if you feel that you still drink some bourbons and are like, oh, that's kind of harsh going down, you might not want to take that step to rye yet. You can absolutely go for it and try it, but it might sit on your shelf for a while until you realize you do like it. It's definitely kind of like your peated scotches, how I've said that before. They're a little bit more challenging, but then once you start to like them, they taste really good. Similar, rye is almost like, American rye is almost like the American version of that. They're a little bit more challenging, and then once you start to like them, you start to like them a lot. A rye bourbon, a high rye bourbon, that would be a good step in between if you're trying to get more towards that ballpark and get an idea what rye tastes like, would be Bullet Bourbon. It's got a higher rye. It's not technically a high rye mash bill. I should make sure I make that clear, but the mash bill does have a lot of rye in it. Another good high rye, Wild Turkey 101 is technically a high rye, and I mentioned that it has that punky old wood taste to this rye, and I'm wondering if that's coming from the rye because I get that same taste in Wild Turkey 101. It's an enjoyable taste. It's a little bit funky if you're not used to it. Once again, this is a type of whiskey where you gotta kind of acquaint yourself to it. This isn't going to be jumping into a swimming pool that's 90 degrees. This is jumping into that pool that's like just a little bit cold, like maybe like 82, and you're like, this is a little bit cold, but now that I'm in it, it feels good. That's exactly how it is getting into rye whiskey, me and my analogies. But this is a little bit closer to that hot water realm, even though it's good and I enjoy it. You got your sniff and spank. This is more towards the spank, although the sniff is very good. So this glass is kind of a sniff and spank of itself. You sniff it and you're like, this is nice. And you drink it and you're like, this is kind of a spanking, but it tastes pretty good. That's kind of how this whiskey is, which is actually funny that I say that because Tyler, the one who was on the podcast and said sniff and spank, that was his whiskey. He loves rye whiskey. He actually gave me a bottle of the Bullet Rye that I was telling you that I like, actually. So that's kind of funny. Maybe he just likes the sniff and spank. He likes a sweet sniff and a little bit harsher of a flavor. That is what you're going to get from rye whiskey, and that is the situation that I would drink rye whiskey in. All right, well, that's going to be about all for today. We just went through a review. Hopefully it was enjoyable to you guys, and if you bought this because you're on the email list, hopefully you enjoy this whiskey. If you don't, I would definitely say don't give it away or throw it away. Definitely put it on your shelf, let it set, and then come back to it later because I really do enjoy this whiskey. And to be fully transparent, when I first started drinking rye, or I first tried rye while I was drinking like bourbons and things, I did not enjoy it very much. So don't throw this out and think, well, I'm never going to like this whiskey, because I used to think that about rye. I used to think, oh, I just don't have a palate for rye. And then I had this whiskey. This was the first rye that I liked, and I had it, and I was like, that is delicious. So don't be afraid to come back to it later. Same thing I did with the peated scotches, like I've said. Don't be afraid to come back to them later when you've drank a little bit more whiskey and you don't just get that alcohol burn right off the bat. Once you're getting good at that, which I think a lot of you listening are probably good at it if you've listened from the beginning to here. Once you start to get good at that, then come back to it if you don't like it right now. That's my 2 cents for the day. That's all I've got today on the Basil Hayden Kentucky Straight Rye Whiskey, aged 10 years. Thank you for listening to this episode of Whiskey Noobs. If you like the show, make sure to help spread the word by introducing friends, coworkers, or anyone that you think would be interested. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming platform, rate the show, review the show, and follow on Instagram at whiskey_noobs to stay up to date. If you want, you can join the email list by sending an email to whiskeynoobspodcast@gmail.com. You'll then be updated every month on what whiskeys I'll be drinking on the show, so you can drink right along with me and review it as we go. Thanks again for listening to the Whiskey Noobs Podcast. Learn to drink, drink to learn. The Whiskey Noobs Podcast does not support underage or otherwise irresponsible consumption of alcohol.